For the record, I don't think the inside of the GL1500 starter is supposed to look like this. This may be the reason it's seized. Hey guys, Octane Restorations, and we are back with the 1988 GL1500 Par 13. So that starter was seized, so this episode we're going to be disassembling the starter and figuring out why it was seized. Whenever I was going into this, I was hoping for nothing catastrophic. I have seen starters where the magnets on the inside have broken, and that has caused them to seize. Hopefully it's not going to be anything major, like the gear shattered or anything like that. Hopefully it's something we can fix. So let's go ahead and let's dive right into it. Again, we got our JIS screwdrivers. It's really the only screwdrivers that I'll pretty much use on anything. Maybe if it's a quick job and it's something that I'm not worried about stripping out, I might use a Phillips, but 99% of anything motorcycle related, it's going to get a GIS screwdriver. But looking at the gears right there, the gears are looking fine. They're spinning freely. But whenever you put it back on, it doesn't spin freely anymore. So that leads me to believe it's in the bottom of the starter. That's where your carbon brushes are. It's gonna sound weird, but if you didn't know, carbon's actually a pretty good conductor of electricity. So in this starter motor, you have 4 brushes. 2 of them are positive and 2 of them are negative. And we got those 2 terminals down at the bottom of the starter. One's a positive and one's a negative. Whenever you send electricity through there, it goes into the carbon brushes. The carbon brushes make contact with pretty much a big spool of wire. And this is real simplified terms. And that electricity passing through the carbon, that spool of wire spins the starter motor. If you want, you can look it up and get really in depth on it. There's actually some really good resources for it. But that's what I was talking about with the carbon brushes that make contact to that little quote-unquote spool of wire, the core of the starter. And as you can see, they are pretty badly rusted. The problem with my bike is it's an 88 GL1500 and the starters were just a little bit different, especially this piece right here that contains the brushes. So we're going to have to try to restore this to the best of my ability. I've got me a Honda shop manual pulled up on my laptop beside me just to ensure that I don't mess anything up or cause any undue harm. But I am going to beat on it, so. This, I was trying to play with it to get it to separate. Inside here, there is a big magnet. It goes around the inside of the starter, and that electrical current, whenever it passes into the wires through the magnet, it's an electric motor, and so it spins. There's a lot of science behind it. Again, I would suggest if you enjoy this type of stuff to go dive into that, because it's actually a pretty fun topic. I used to really hate dealing with electrical stuff, but the more I've dove into it, the more it's problem solving to me, which I enjoy. And I feel like if you enjoy solving problems, then you might really enjoy electrical stuff too. But now I have to separate this from the actual starter body. But it's just really badly corroded. These normally have an O-ring here that are supposed to protect them, but I don't know if the O-ring failed or if moisture just was able to get in there, or if it was just, even condensation. But right here I'm spraying some electrical cleaner on it and giving some places a nice little tippy tap to just kind of separate it. There's also springs that hold the carbon brushes in contact with the starter motor, and I had one of them broken. The reason they choose carbon instead of like copper is because carbon's soft, so it can always maintain contact with that spinning part of the starter motor. Now, one downside to that is because it is soft, it is a consumable part. It's kind of like your brake pads. So sometimes you do have to replace those carbon brushes. But as you see there, those little blocks attached to the wire, those are the carbon brushes I was talking about. This is just a fast drying electrical cleaner I'm spraying with this. I do take pictures of everything I do and also video it for y'all. But if you're disassembling something like this, I would recommend taking pictures or video the whole process. Now I've got some rust dissolver that I'm going to use on the metal holders for the carbon brushes, because the carbon brushes kept getting stuck just because there was so much rust in deposits. Gonna spray it with some rust dissolver, let it do its thing, and then I'm gonna use a little Dremel tool to get some more of the rust off. I had a buddy get a wire from one of these wire brushes thrown into his eye, so that's why I wear iPro. I would highly recommend it because it did not look fun. So now I'm just going to take some steel wool. I'm using a screwdriver to press it through those holes. Remember, there are those springs, so that's what I was showing with that little Dremel tool, was I was using that to hold the spring back so that I could thoroughly clean the inside of that little brush holder. This was the brush holder plate for the newer GL1500s, so like from 90 to 2000, which, as you'll see, the biggest difference is they actually have the carbon brushes, 2 of them already on there on the plate, and mine does not. Otherwise it looks pretty similar, so what we're going to do is we're going to steal one of the springs from that starter plate and put it onto our old one. I don't mind Frankensteining some parts, putting some newer parts not made for it on there if it'll fit, but if I can keep it original, that's what I'm going to try to do. So here I was fighting with that spring, but I got it out. And when I say spring, it's little pieces of coiled wire, and all they do is they push the brush in towards the starter motor to keep it in contact. Whenever it breaks, you know that brush isn't moving, it's not making contact, and then your motor's not going to be getting adequate voltage to spin over your starter motor. So now I'm stealing the spring from the new one. And those old springs are by the pliers, in between the pair of pliers and the gloves. Like I was saying earlier, all they are is a coiled wire. These have a lot of potential energy, so if you get one off, you might have to go chase it across your shop like I did. Now since we got that sorted out, we're going to go ahead and reassemble it. The reassembly is a reverse of the disassembly. So again, like I was saying, I took pictures of all this so I knew where that plate needed to go and which brushes need to go in which brush holder. It does matter whenever you whenever you connect the positive and the negative terminals to the starter. But I had a picture to refer to and also had my shop manual. But now those springs are working great on this. As you can see, it keeps pushing it out. It is a big pain in the butt to get this back on. Every starter I've ever, tore apart to rebuild or to clean, it is always a giant pain in the butt. Even lawnmower starters. Someone's got a good idea on holding it, maybe with like a zip tie or something. Maybe put 4 little zip ties around the carbon brushes and then just cut them off. This is the difficult part, getting all the carbon brushes onto the starter core. It's also known as the armature or the rotor, just depending on where you're from. This one doesn't contain any field coils. It just contains that permanently mounted magnet on the inside of the starter body. This is the part that isn't fun. Trying to get all the brushes on the armature as you're pushing it back up. Like I was telling you, the springs are made to push the carbon brushes against the armature as they wear. So you gotta get them all in the right place, and you gotta push against the springs on all of them. And then you gotta get the armature in there. Right here I had my shop manual and I was checking to see if there was a secret way of doing it that I didn't know about. And there wasn't. This is probably the only good idea I've ever had. To get those starter motor brushes held, I used little alligator clips. And then I was able just to push it right up in there. I didn't see that online, anything like that. I kind of came up with that myself, just something to hold it. I think I ended up bending one of the alligator clips, though, I'll be honest. So, that was... I know I said that was the easier part, but this is a pretty difficult part as well. So those two little gears, you have to line those up perfectly across from each other. If they're off a single tooth, either one, then the starter motor won't engage properly. Also remember to put a little grease in there because these are moving parts. I put a decent amount of grease in there. You don't want to put so much that it causes it to bind, especially during, you know, cold starts and stuff like that. But you do want to put an adequate amount of grease for those metal on metal. You know, you have metal on metal contact and just displace water. Just helps, you know, avoid corrosion.
What you waiting for? I can see you, honey, what you waiting for? I can see you, honey, acting kinda funny. I can see you, honey, and don't you want me? I can see you, honey, what you waiting for? I can see you, honey, what you waiting for? Oh, I can see you, honey, acting kinda funny. I can see you, honey, and don't you want me? They call me the best.
I did grease the top of the armature, but not the electrical connections or where the carbon brushes go. You want to keep grease away from that. So that gear right there, I applied a little bit of grease to that gear too.
Touch me in the morning, laugh into the night. I wanna be with somebody who knows how to cry and show me that I am the one to come running to the rest of your life. You only really know one thing, there's just something right about us. So come on.
So I was trying to get this top part off just to inspect it. You know, we already have the starter on the bench, might as well inspect it. But it was stuck pretty bad. So I just put the screws back in it and said we're going to grease it real good and we're going to send it on its way. And again, you don't want to pack it full of grease. You just want a thick coating on all the gears and everything. If you have a shop manual from Honda, they will tell you exactly which parts need some gear and grease on them. Kind of like the top of the armature needs a little bit of gear and grease, but not where the brushes connect, on all the gears. And they actually have a icon by all the pieces during reassembly that you got to put grease on. So I've got my shop manual pulled up next to me, and that's what I was going off of. Again, it is a pain in the butt to get those two loose gears lined up properly. It won't fit right if you don't do it. These are those two gears I was talking about that have to be perfectly aligned. And there's a lot of teeth, and they'll, you know, you can even set them side by side, but you just got to get them exactly across from each other. If you don't have them lined up, you'll know it because you won't be able to reassemble it properly. And again, I'm sorry for not getting this on video. I switched from a GoPro to an iPhone, and the iPhones, weirdly enough, zoom in whenever you start recording. So I did miss it, and I do apologize, but I get better at filming with the iPhone, I promise. So now it's just a matter of applying the screws. Just want to reinstall them properly. And now we're going to bench test the starter. I would always recommend this before throwing it back in the machine. So you have a starter solenoid, and what that does, whenever you turn your key to the ignition, the starter solenoid, pretty much it's a closed circuit, and then it opens. It opens power from your battery to your starter. Most starter solenoids will go directly from the battery to the starter solenoid, and then starter solenoid to the starter. So you're getting the whole 12 volts to the starter, so you can do what's called bench testing the starter. You can connect the negative to the negative, and then you can connect the positive to the positive, and theoretically the starter should spin over. Gonna go ahead and we're gonna test that now. So she spins over beautiful, she spins fast. It's exactly what we wanted. So we're gonna go put this back on the motorcycle. This is Octane Restorations. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next part. This is the 1988 GL1500 Part 13 Starter Rebuild.